All right, you want to talk about this whole situation with Sony and Kadokawa.
All right. So we've covered this the initial part before, where Sony was possibly rumored to buy out Kadokawa, and then sometime after that, it was announced that Kadokawa definitely was interested actually in being acquired by Sony, and part of this was because they were trying to prevent a takeover from, I can't remember what the company is. I think it's either a Korean or Chinese company. They were trying to prevent being bought out. So that was the reason why they wanted to be purchased by Sony, to prevent them from being bought out by one of the other companies. So something has happened. While Sony has not acquired Kadokawa, they have what they both agreed to what they've called a Forum Strategic Capital and Business Alliance, where Sony is acquiring 12,054,100 new Kadokawa shares for approximately 50 billion yen. And as a result, this is going to give Sony a 10% share of the company, which makes Sony effectively the largest shareholder of Kadokawa. So, and then let me see what else does it say here in this form, because that's essentially it. But I'm just checking through here to make sure there's nothing else that really needs to be said. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of things. I have several things to state, but I will let you go ahead and start things off.
Well, obviously Sony owns Elden Ring now. Elden Ring is a first-party game, as some fanboys have said, who don't understand how things actually work in real life. Either that or they just read the headline and didn't read the details. But that aside, I think that it is an interesting situation, and honestly, I don't really know exactly how this is going to go overall. Like, whether it's going to be something that actually has a real impact, or if it's just basically like this makes it so that Kadokawa can start making anime based on, or start like licensing out anime from Sony, or something to that effect. Based on Sony franchises is what I was trying to say. I mean, there's any number of things that could happen with this. Sony, of course, being the largest shareholder at 10% is significant, but I'm glad that it's 10% and not full ownership, because the full ownership had me a lot more concerned. This 10% thing, it's kind of like, okay, sure, whatever. I mean, we'll see what kind of impact it has in the future. I'm at a point where I certainly obviously don't want Sony to mess up FromSoft, but I also am not in a position where I feel like I'm worried about it. I think that, even though they're technically a majority shareholder, 10% is still only 10%. And I think that there's enough of us. I would like to think that Sony is wise enough to not try and mess with FromSoft and just let them continue to do their thing, because they make quality games that have been extremely successful. And if Sony tries to stick their fingers in there and make them, add a disabled, whatever, just like a random person with checking a bunch of boxes, I think FromSoft would just say, no, we're not doing that. And I mean, anyway, I don't know. TLDL, I'm not concerned. I think that it's not really a big deal. Obviously, they don't actually own Elden Ring or anything. Elden Ring is not a first-party game. I don't even think you could call it second-party. It's just They have a large stock in Kadokawa. I think they already had like 14% in FromSoft or something anyway. So I don't know that it necessarily increases how much they have for FromSoft, just increases what they have for Kadokawa.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely is a better situation than we originally thought it would have been. And I couldn't confirm this, but I thought heard a few things about originally Kadokawa wanted Sony to buy them outright, but Sony only wanted to purchase the entertainment division, and that's why there was some disagreement about what was going to happen until they decided, okay, you can just buy up to 10% of the company, and you can that way we're safe, and you can still have some of the company. So I like that aspect. That's sort of a good compromise, I'd say. Now, while I do agree that Sony, it's not like Sony owns the company or anything like that, or they are able to make demands. I do believe they are somewhat in a position that they can try to negotiate or have some sort of wiggle room where they can maybe have some future exclusives, or at the very least, timed exclusives. Now, I don't know how the other 90% would feel about that, which is why, I like that they can sort of counter, if there's a large majority, they can counter Sony and say, yeah, we would rather much have the games go on every platform so we can make more money rather than you just get the money from having exclusives. But I do think that as having a large portion, having 10% of the company and being the largest shareholder, it is something that I still have some caution with, because I don't know if Sony might one day try to acquire more shares and more part of the company.
True.
I mean, because they don't even have to have full ownership. If they just get 51%, then they are the majority.
Yeah.
And they have, pretty much full say about what happens. So it's not something I'm concerned about right now, but just down the line, what can happen with that. But I definitely think that there's nothing to worry about right now. So it's good that Kadokawa is safe from being bought out by companies they deemed as threats, but I'm also content that it wasn't at the cost of their entire company. So definitely a good. And maybe one day, maybe Sony, well, I mean, Sony hasn't urged from software at all. Maybe, we could get Bloodborne brought back, but that's probably still just a pipe dream, and will be 20 years from now.
Pretty much. All right. Good stuff.